My name is Marissa Hale, and I am 34 years old. Nothing prepared me for what I saw that night. My parents, both in their 70s, stood shivering outside my own front door, lips blue from the cold, while inside my in-laws hosted an elegant dinner party with strangers. My father clutched his chest, his recent heart surgery scar hidden beneath layers that weren't enough against the freezing temperature. My mother could barely stand her osteoarthritis, worsened by the cold. But what happened next changed everything for all of us. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because this story will make your family drama look small. Growing up, my parents gave me everything they possibly could despite our modest means. We live in Albany, New York, on a quiet street where winter clung to the curbs until May. My dad left before dawn to drive a yellow school bus, his thermos rattling against the dashboard, and came home with diesel on his hands. After dinner, he changed into a darker pair of coveralls and headed to the neighbor's garage to fix the engines that other people had given up on. He was proud of the way a stubborn machine could come back to life if you just listened long enough to what it was trying to tell you. Mom worked the morning shift at a shabby restaurant off Central Avenue. She used to joke that the fryer oil had soaked into her bones, and maybe it had. Even so, by 6 o'clock she'd be home with a grocery bag and a plan. No matter how tired she was, she stirred big pots of stew, baked chicken thighs with paprika, or stretched a pound of ground beef into a casserole that somehow lasted 3 days. She set 2 plates for them and 1 for me, with a little folded napkin and a fork polished against her apron. We ate with the window cracked open even in winter to let the steam out, our breath fogging as we talked about school, about bus routes, about customers who left dimes as tips and thought it was generous. Nothing about us was glamorous, but there was a rhythm to our life that made me feel safe. Saturdays meant laundry at the coin-op and Dad's radio playing oldies while he sorted sockets by size. Mom clipped coupons at the table and circled items in neon marker: buy one get one pasta, canned tomatoes, paper towels when the price dipped under $1. I learned the small math of survival from her, the way to stack sales with coupons, the stubborn dignity in paying cash, and keeping receipts rubber-banded in a shoebox. When I was 12, Dad taught me to drive the bus around the empty lot on a Sunday afternoon, the wheel huge under my palms, my feet not quite reaching the pedals. He laughed when I kept drifting to the right. "The road pulls you if you let it," he said. "You set your lane, not the other way around." It sounded like a joke, but it stuck. I thought of it years later whenever I had to hold my line while other people tugged at my choices. School was my way out, and my parents treated it like a second job they could do with me. Dad quizzed me on multiplication tables between bites of meatloaf. Mom read my essays out loud to catch where the sentences stumbled. When acceptance letters started arriving, the relief on their faces looked almost like disbelief. We spread the envelopes across the kitchen table like cards in a game we didn't know how to play. Money was the shadow sitting in the 4th chair. They didn't say, "We can't afford it." They said, "We'll make it work." And they did more than that. They cashed out the small CD they'd been adding to for years and emptied the envelope of emergency bills from the back of Mom's sock drawer. Dad picked up more engine work on weekends and came home with his knuckles split open, washing them under the cold tap because the hot water heater had to stretch to the end of the month. Mom started bringing home leftover rolls in a bakery box, and we pretended it was a treat, not a strategy. When my roommate freshman year talked about her parents paying tuition with a card that earned airline miles, I thought about my father's cracked hands and kept my mouth shut. I called home every Sunday from a corner of the dorm hallway where the Wi-Fi worked. Mom asked what I was eating and whether I was sleeping. Dad wanted to know if my professors knew what they were doing. "Don't let them talk down to you," he'd say. "You're the customer." They mailed care packages stuffed with ramen, socks, and notes on index cards. I kept those notes in a shoebox under my bed like other girls kept love letters. Over time, their bodies started whispering limits they refused to accept. Mom's knees swelled, then her fingers. She called it just stiffness, even while she massaged her joints with menthol that made the whole house smell like mint and medicine. She'd stand at the stove anyway, leaning a hip against the counter, stirring with both hands to hide the tremor. If I offered to help, she'd shoo me away with a smile. Go rest, honey. Food tastes better when your mother makes it. Dad's chest aches came in little flares he dismissed as indigestion. He changed the subject when I tried to push. Only after his heart surgery 6 months ago, a bright sterile Tuesday that stretched into a week, did he admit the fear that had been living under his shirt collar. I waited in the hospital room and watched him sleep, the monitor beeping steady, the same rhythm he'd kept for us my whole life. He woke and asked if the bus route had run on time without him. I laughed and cried at the same time, and he pretended not to notice either. Recovery looked like stubborn steps around the block, like a pillbox with the days of the week in cracked blue letters, like Mom bargaining with her niece to let her get the laundry down the stairs. They were slower, but no less themselves. When I tried to hire help, they refused with polite ferocity. We're not a project, Mom said. We're people. Dad added, save your money for something that flies. Pride can be heavy, but there's never crushed me. I met Eric Lawson at a marketing conference in Chicago where the lobbies smell like burnt espresso and hotel carpet cleaner, and everyone wears a name badge like armor. I was there with a small team from my firm, carrying tote bags full of brochures I had designed, my head buzzing with jargon and possibilities. He stopped me after a breakout session on brand storytelling, complimenting a question I'd asked about authenticity and conversion rates. He had a quick, disarming smile and a way of listening that made me feel like I had all the time in the world to finish a thought. We wound up at the same cocktail hour, then the same after-dinner panel, and finally at a late-night diner 2 blocks from the river eating pie that tasted better than it looked. He told me he'd grown up in Dallas, that his parents, Carol and Henry, ran a small real estate company, and that he wanted to build campaigns that felt honest in an industry addicted to polish. He made me laugh. I made him pause before answering. We exchanged numbers leaning against the gleaming chrome of a revolving door, the city wind lifting my hair like a promise. The weeks that followed were the kind you remember for the ordinary things, back-to-back texts that turned into phone calls, a playlist he sent for my commute, a photo of the sunrise from his apartment because you need proof mornings can be kind. He flew to see me once. I flew to see him next. We discovered that we both hated loud restaurants because we liked to hear the person in front of us, that we both kept soft t-shirts from college for sleeping, that we both used the Notes app as a second brain. He said he'd never felt so aligned with someone. I felt relieved by how easy it was. Our lives were busy and our schedules complicated, and somehow that made us believe we were already excellent at compromise. We got married quickly, quicker than my friends wished and faster than my parents understood, but it felt like sliding into a seat already warmed for me. There was no dramatic proposal on a cliff. There was a walk along the river, a ring in his pocket, and his voice shaking while he asked me to be his wife. I said yes with both hands. So, we started sketching a small wedding that would fit into the breathing spaces of our jobs. Backyard lights, a short ceremony, good food, loud laughter, and dancing until our feet hurt. I called my mother that night and she cried into the phone, the happy kind. My father cleared his throat and said, "Be smart, be kind," then asked if he could drive us to the courthouse to get the license. Eric wanted me to meet his parents right away. We picked a weekend and met them for an engagement dinner at a country club that had a dress code printed on the door like a warning. Carol was petitely sharpened, perfect hair, perfect manicure, a watch that flashed when she moved her wrist. Henry had the practiced warmth of a man who'd shaken hands for a living. We had barely sat down before Carol smiled at me and said, "So you're from Albany." "Henry, do you remember that little street with the tiny houses? I think we sold a place there in the 90s. It was delivered lightly, almost musically, but I felt the weight. Later, when she asked about my parents, I told her the truth. School bus driver, cook. "How sweet," she said, stirring her water with a straw. I adore humble beginnings. By dessert, they were describing a party they'd throw, properly, for the engagement, something with real catering and a live trio. Carol laughed about the poor little house where I'd grown up, 1 bathroom, imagine. And Henry shook his head like it was a charming anecdote. I held my napkin in my lap and thought about the kitchen table where my mother folded coupons and my father explained why an engine needed patience. Eric squeezed my knee under the table, a quiet signal to breathe. In the car afterward, I said, very carefully, that the comments had landed hard. He kissed my knuckles and said, "Mom just likes order. She fills silence with opinions. She'll adore you once she knows you." And I wanted to believe him. I told myself that families sometimes come with varnish and that I was sturdy wood underneath. We planned our wedding the way project managers plan launches, shared spreadsheets, vendor calls during lunch breaks, a color palette decided while I was on hold with an airline. From the beginning, Carol hovered at the edges, sending links to better florists and suggesting a venue that was, coincidentally, where she played tennis. I ignored most of it. When she invited herself to our tasting, I said yes because I was trying to be generous. She wrinkled her nose at the roasted chicken I loved and said, "This is fine for a barbecue, but a wedding needs elegance." She snapped photos of the menu and texted someone named Caterer H with notes. Then came the flowers. I had chosen simple, seasonal arrangements, peonies and greenery in clear glass, because I wanted the room to feel like a garden. Carol replaced the order without telling me. I found out when the florist called to confirm the pivot to cascading orchids and tall gold stands. When I called Eric, my voice shook so much I had to sit down. He sighed and said, "She thinks she's helping. I'll talk to her." He did, and later he reported back that she cried, said she felt excluded, and promised to scale back. The flowers stayed changed anyway. I told myself to let it go. There were bigger things to care about. The final week before the wedding, Carol swept in like a task force. She hired a planner, who was really her friend Denise, printed place cards in a script I hadn't chosen, and sent an email to our DJ with a revised playlist that replaced our first dance song with one she liked better. When I pushed back, she tilted her head and said, "Sweetheart, trust experience. These details matter." On the morning of the wedding, I walked into the reception hall and saw a ballroom that belonged to someone else. Orchids instead of peonies, steak instead of chicken, caviar I had never ordered, a cake I didn't recognize. Carol stood by the entrance, radiant with accomplishment. "Perfection," she said, and kissed my cheeks without touching them. I found Eric in a side room tying his tie. I told him that I felt erased. He held my shoulders and said, "Don't worry." He said it like a spell that could turn chaos into comfort. I searched his face for doubt and saw only the boy who wanted his mother to be easy. So I told myself that love is louder than orchids, and that after the day ended, it would be our home, our meals, our quiet mornings that mattered. I believed it because I needed to. My career took off faster than Eric's, and for a while I felt guilty about it, as if success were a seat I had stolen from him on a crowded bus. While he bounced between accounts at his agency, I landed a national campaign that vaulted me from reliable to lead. My calendar filled with client flights and proof decks, my salary leapt, and the bonus came with a note from the VP that simply said, "Keep going." So I stopped apologizing when my phone lit up at dinner. I bought noise-canceling headphones and learned to sleep during Wheels Up. With the raise, I started running numbers the way my mother had taught me, quiet, practical math done at the kitchen table. Austin was booming, but there were pockets on the north side where a two-story could still be had if you moved fast and didn't demand perfection. I wanted a place that wouldn't just hold us, but would also hold my parents when the stairs started to look like a wall. We toured houses every Saturday, new builds that smelled like paint, 90s colonials with brass fixtures, a ranch with countertops polished to the color of coffee. Then I found it, a sun-baked two-story in a cul-de-sac with a live oak spreading shade like a generous hand. The front porch had room for 2 rockers. Inside, sunlight fell across the living room in a way that made the walls look warmer. Best of all, just past the entry stood a modest first-floor guest bedroom with its own bathroom. I could see my parents there immediately, Dad napping after a long morning of crossword puzzles, Mom teaching me how to make her chicken and rice while the game murmured from a TV in the corner. It wasn't grand, but it felt right. I put down most of what I had saved years of saying no to impulse buys and yes to overtime, then closed after a short, nervous escrow. On the final walkthrough, I touched the banister and felt the difference between renting a life and owning one. I bought a secondhand dining table and a couch that actually fit the room. I ordered a kettle like the one from my childhood and stocked the pantry with my father's favorite oatmeal. I had grab bars installed in the first floor shower and swapped the round doorknobs for levers that wouldn't fight arthritic fingers. Small things, invisible to guests, obvious to family. Eric was proud in the way that made me soften. He brought home a bottle of decent champagne and scrawled a crooked "Welcome home" on a sticky note because he said balloons were for people with better lung capacity. We stood in the empty kitchen and listened to the quiet. It sounded like the promise I'd been working toward. I called my parents that night and gave them a tour over video. Mom cried at the sight of the guest room. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Looks sturdy." I told them about the grab bars and the lever handles, about the short hallway and the way the sun would warm the bed in the morning. My mother asked if she could bring her set of mixing bowls the next time they visited. I told her I'd cleared a shelf just for them. Carol and Henry came the following weekend. Carol stepped through the doorway the way buyers do, scanning and judging in a single sweep. "Charming," she said, which sounded suspiciously like small. Henry nodded toward the staircase and asked about square footage before he'd seen the kitchen. I tried to keep the tour brisk. When we reached the first floor guest room, I opened the door like I was showing them a treasure. "This is for my parents," I said, "so they don't have to do stairs." Carol didn't miss a beat. "Oh," she said brightly, and then, this room would be better converted into a study for Henry. She floated into the middle of the space and stretched her arms. Think of it. A proper gentleman's office. Dark wood, leather chair, shelves to the ceiling. She turned toward Henry with a smile that suggested the idea had been waiting for this exact moment. I laughed, a soft, polite sound that tried to be a boundary. "It's really for my parents," I repeated. "That's why we chose this house." Eric cleared his throat, playing translator. "Mom, we talked about this." Carol waved it off. Of course, just thinking ahead." People change their minds. After they left, a text arrived from Carol, a link to a line of executive desks that elevate any home. Another followed with paint swatches, rich tobacco, library green. I typed and deleted 3 replies before settling on thanks, but the guest room stays a guest room. She heart-reacted the message with the neutrality of a person bookmarking a future renovation. Work blurred the next few months into a series of late nights broken by soft mornings. I learned the sound our house made at 5 a.m., the small tick in the ducts before the air kicked on, the hum of the fridge that settled my nerves. On Sundays, I meal prepped low-sodium options for Dad and labeled the containers. I bought a heated throw for the guest bed and a lamp bright enough for Mom to read her recipe cards. We hosted my parents for a weekend trial. I watched Dad move easily from the bedroom to the breakfast table, listened to Mom sigh happily as she sat without bracing her knees on the chair arms. The house worked. It was a relief I felt in my shoulders. Carol remained fascinated by our potential. She sent a Pinterest board labeled Entryway Makeover that replaced my bench with a sculptural console and mirrored wall. She offered the number of their handyman, who apparently specialized in tasteful upgrades. When I demurred, she began to frame her suggestions as favors. "Let us gift you a built-in," she wrote once. "It will add value." Henry asked, casually, whether my office allowed mail to be delivered to the house during holidays. "Ours gets swamped," he said. "Could be useful to redirect." Little things piled up that didn't look like a pile until I stepped back. A note from the HOA about a package with Henry's name on it. A voicemail from a window company confirming tomorrow's estimate. Carol asking for room measurements, just in case we find curtains you'd love. When I pushed for specifics, everything became a misunderstanding. "We're only trying to help," she'd say, steamrolling the word only. Eric would rub his temples and call it enthusiasm. "Mom just likes order," he repeated, as if the phrase could domesticate whatever pressed at the edges of our rooms. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this was about taste, not territory. But at the time, I didn't realize how far they were willing to go. I planned the housewarming the way my mother plans Sunday dinners, simple, thoughtful, and shaped around the people I love. I made a handwritten list, 12 names, not counting Eric and me. Close friends from work, our across-the-street neighbors who brought our trash cans in the first week, and my parents. I built the menu around Dad's cardiologist's notes taped inside my pantry door. Roast chicken rubbed with lemon and herbs, not salt. A big bowl of cucumber salad. Roasted sweet potatoes slicked with olive oil. A tray of berries and pound cake instead of anything frosted. For Mom, I staged a sturdy armchair near the sliding door where the floor is perfectly flat, a soft throw across the back, a side table for her tea. I ordered paper lanterns, the cheap kind that look expensive at dusk, and strung them across the backyard with Eric's help. At the hardware store, I picked up citronella candles and a pack of hooks, and felt that particular pride that comes from solving small things yourself. The budget lived in a spreadsheet with 3 color codes, green for paid, yellow for pending, red for Marissa. Please resist. 3 days before the party, Eric came into the kitchen while I was marinating the chicken and said, almost casually, "So Mom invited a couple of friends." "Just a few. She didn't want to bother you." I stared at him over the bowl. "A couple?" He nodded, wincing as if he knew how that sounded. "They're low maintenance. They'll probably just stop by." "A couple is 2. In Carol's vocabulary, apparently, it is a door left ajar. I sent our final text with the time and the address, added an extra pack of sparkling water to the grocery list, and told myself to be flexible. Flexibility is a virtue. I reminded the part of me that likes lists more than surprises. Still, I slid an extra chair into the living room and pushed my parents' armchair a little farther from the main flow, just in case. On the evening of the party, I came home from picking up lemon ice and flowers and thought, for a confused second, that I had pulled into the wrong driveway. Cars lined both sides of our cul-de-sac, and a valet stand, an actual valet stand, glowed under a rented umbrella at the curb. A man in a black vest approached my car with a smile too professional for a neighborhood get-together. "Welcome," he said, reaching for my door. "Name?" I carried the ice inside and stepped into someone else's life. The air smelled like truffle and new money. Tall heaters flickered on the patio I hadn't rented, music swelled from speakers I hadn't bought, and in my foyer stood an arrangement of white orchids taller than me in a vase I didn't recognize. The living room had been rearranged. My thrifted rug was gone, replaced by a pale runner. A velvet settee in a color I can only describe as expensive bruise sat where my parents' chair had been. My framed photos, the one of Mom blowing out candles with her eyes half closed, the one of Dad at the bus depot in his reflective vest, had vanished, replaced by abstract paintings with price tags discreetly peeled off the corners. People were everywhere, laughing as if they had rehearsed it. Strangers in cocktail dresses sipped champagne from coupes, while servers in black carried trays of tiny food that must have cost more per bite than my weekly groceries. In the dining room, the table I had sanded myself sagged beneath towers of catered canapes, and a man in a white coat was shaving curls of something onto oysters. A floral menu card announced 7 courses designed by a chef whose name I had only seen on television. In the kitchen, my carefully labeled low-sodium dishes were nowhere to be seen. "Marissa." Carol's voice rose above the noise like a bell with a crack in it. She swept toward me, luminous in a pale suit, her perfume already claiming the doorway. "Isn't it perfect?" She took my hands, then spun to address the nearest cluster of guests. "Everyone, our hostess. This is Marissa, and this," she gestured expansively around her, "this is Eric's new nest." Eric's new nest. The words landed like thumbtacks. I looked past her shoulder and saw Henry shaking hands with a man I recognized from his office Christmas photos, leading him to my patio as if he were cutting a ribbon. On the mantel, a gold-lettered sign that hadn't existed an hour ago spelled "The Lawson Home" in looping script. I tried to find something ordinary to hold on to. I opened the fridge for sparkling water and found only French glass bottles and a cake decorated with a monogram that wasn't mine. When I asked a server about the low-sodium chicken, he blinked and said, "We have cocoa vin, ma'am. The chef recommends the reduction." I thought about my father's pills lined up in their Monday through Sunday case and felt a hot, helpless fury crawl up my throat. Where did our photos go? I asked Carol, my voice low enough to be a test of whether she could hear anything but herself. She laughed gently, as if I'd told a joke about clutter. Sweetheart, we moved them for the aesthetic. The photographer needed clean lines. Don't worry, everything's safe. She squeezed my arm and turned away before I could answer, already ushering a group toward the backyard lights, already narrating. Look at the flow, open, inviting. We wanted to give Eric a launch worthy of his potential. I searched for Eric and found him by the bar, shoulders hunched, a smile pinned on like a name tag he couldn't peel off. When our eyes met, he came over quickly. I told her a couple, he said, palms up, the apology a small shelter in a storm he hadn't tried hard enough to stop. But it got away from me. It got away from our house, I corrected, forcing the words through teeth that wanted to chatter with adrenaline. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, we're on our way. So excited. Save me my chair. I stared at the spot where that chair should have been and saw, instead, a velvet settee and a photographer crouching for the perfect angle of someone else's evening. I typed back, hurry. Text when you arrive. Carol clinked a crystal glass near the archway, and the room hushed with the obedience of people trained to hush for money. She lifted her chin. Friends, let's raise a glass to Eric Lawson and his beautiful new home. A nest where he will soar. Laughter. Applause. The word home stretched thin enough to tear. I stood in the middle of my living room, in my own dress and shoes, feeling like a guest who had arrived without an invitation. I drove to pick up my parents with my phone buzzing nonstop in my purse, texts from friends asking if they should bring anything, a picture from a coworker who'd found the lanterns pretty in the dusk. I ignored them all. My mother had texted 2 minutes away. Your father is excited, and I could picture them bundled in their coats, my father listing the turns even though he wasn't driving, my mother pressing a napkin-wrapped loaf of her cinnamon bread into her tote as if I didn't already have too much food. I parked at the curb and hurried up the walk, the porch lights glowing warmer than the air. I slid my key into the front door and felt resistance. A soft, stubborn catch. I tried again, jaw clenching. The key didn't go in. It stuttered at the edge like a sentence cut off. I pulled it out, checked it, tried the deadbolt, then the knob again. Nothing. The metal scraped in a way I hadn't heard before, a friction that didn't belong to my house. Marissa? My mother's voice came from the driveway. They were there, exactly as I'd imagined, and yet not. My father breathing heavier than usual, each exhale a small fog in the cold. My mother shivering even inside her thick coat, trying to smile like the air wasn't needling her joints. I waved them closer, swallowing the quick, hot rise of panic. One SEC, I said too brightly. They must have, I don't know, adjusted the lock with the party. I tried the back door. As I rounded the house, I saw the patio lights doubled in the dark window glass and the silhouettes of strangers floating across my kitchen like they owned the floor. The back knob didn't budge either. Then a man stepped into the mudroom on the other side of the glass, a white shirt, black vest, expression professional and empty. He slid the latch closed as if locking a display case and mouthed, closed. I rapped on the glass with my knuckles. He cracked the door 2 inches, the heat spilling out like a taunt, and said, entrance for guests only. My parents are freezing, I said. And I am the host. Open the door. He offered the kind of smile people use to refuse refunds. I was told to keep service entrances clear. The door clicked shut. I stared at my own reflection, wild-eyed, and wanted to punch the glass. We tried the side gate next. It was zip-tied shut with a neatness that made my stomach turn. Through the kitchen window, I could see Carol's pale suit near the island, her hands painting the air while she told some story about Eric's vision. I knocked on the pane hard enough to sting. Her head tilted. She turned, saw me, and for a heartbeat her face went still. Then she lifted her hand and wiggled her fingers in a queenly wave before gliding toward the breakfast nook. She stopped 2 feet from the glass, close enough for me to see the powder dusting her jawline. She didn't open the door. She didn't even touch the handle. She smiled the way someone smiles for a camera and said, "Come back later when it's more convenient." I laughed because there was no other sound in my body that could come out. "It's my house," I said, but she had already pivoted back to her audience, her mouth moving into the next anecdote while my parents huddled behind me. My father leaned on the railing and coughed the way he does when he's trying not to cough. My mother rubbed her wrist, an old habit when her hands start to ache, and whispered, "Marissa, it's okay. We can wait in the car." We shouldn't have had to. I looked at the small basement window tucked near the shrubs, half above ground, half below, the one I cracked in spring to clear paint fumes. The latch was simple, the kind installed by someone who trusted the world. "Stay here," I told my parents, and knelt in the mulch. The window stuck at first, then gave with a tiny squeal like a secret being told. Cold soil pressed against my knees. I slid my arm through, felt around for the interior clip, and heard it snap open. "Marissa," my mother hissed, "your dress." But I was already wriggling. I pushed my shoulders through the frame, then my hips, the rough edge scraping the back of my thigh. The sill caught my palm and tore a line across it. I bit my lips so I wouldn't yelp and landed on the concrete floor in a soft crash that sounded loud in my own house. I stood, breath smoking in the cold basement air, and tasted iron. I hit the stairs 2 at a time, the blood from my hand marking the banister in tiny commas. At the top, I paused to listen. Music, laughter, the hiss of something sautéing. I opened the door to the kitchen and stepped into brightness. A server flinched when he saw me, as if I'd emerged from a trapdoor. I walked past him, past a woman in a beaded dress asking for sparkling water. I reached the front hallway, unlatched the door, and pulled it open so hard the wreath smacked the wall. Cold air flooded in like an accusation. "Come in," I said to my parents, my voice shaking with anger and, underneath it, a fear I didn't want to name. I took my mother's elbow. I took my father's hand, the one with the faint scar where he cut it changing a belt in '09, and felt how cold he was. His fingers were stiff, the skin at his knuckles white. When we crossed the threshold, a hush fell as if someone had pressed a remote. Conversations clipped mid-sentence. Forks hovered. Music kept playing, but quieter somehow, like it had lost its nerve. My parents stood just inside, uncertain, eyes adjusting to the light and the staring. I guided them to the living room, to the place where their chair should have been. The velvet settee glared at me. I grabbed 2 dining chairs from along the wall and dragged them to the corner. "Sit," I asked, and my mother did with a small sound I recognized as both relief and pain. My father sank down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His color looked wrong, a grayish tint around his mouth. "Warm your hands," my mother murmured, cupping his fingers between hers and blowing on them the way she did when I skinned a knee as a child. "It's warmer now. It's warmer." She rubbed, her thumbs traveling over the swollen joints. He nodded, but his breath came shorter, snagging on each inhale. A few guests shifted, then pretended to adjust their cuffs or their bracelets. Someone whispered, "Who are they?" Karen from somewhere stepped closer with a napkin as if a square of linen could fix the weather. The server with the oysters hovered at the archway, unsure if this counted as a scene. I looked for Eric and found him in the dining room doorway, his face pale, his eyes on his parents. Carol stood near the bar with her chin lifted like a swan. She didn't move toward us. Henry murmured to the man beside him and looked vaguely uncomfortable, like a golf date delayed by rain. "Dad," I said softly. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow lifts. He pressed a hand there, as if to remind it how. "I'm okay," he tried, because he always tries first. But the word okay fractured on his tongue. My mother's hands kept moving. "Breathe," she whispered. Like the doctor said. Her own breath was choppy. The adrenaline was a cruel heater, warming her and stealing her steadiness at the same time. I knelt, ignoring the sting in my scraped palm, and touched my father's shoulder. His skin felt clammy. The edges of my vision narrowed, and for a second the room tunneled into just his face, the stubborn life in his eyes flickering. "Call someone," a woman said into the quiet, as if she were ordering another drink. Eric finally moved. "We need to," he started, but the sentence didn't know where to go. "We're calling an ambulance," I said, already pulling my phone from my pocket. My fingers trembled enough to miss the unlock once, twice. On the third try, the keypad blurred and then cleared, and I pressed 911 with the kind of care you use to thread a needle. The operator's voice was steady. I gave our address. I said my father was having difficulty breathing. I said his lips were pale and he was cold. I said the words in a rush until she slowed me down, and then I said them in order, the way she asked. She told me help was on the way, to keep him upright, to loosen anything tight around his neck. I fumbled with his scarf and felt the rasp of wool against my hands. Around us, the party resumed its silence, the kind that follows a dropped glass that never hits the floor. Carol kept her distance. Her eyes slid from me to the guests, as if calculating which angle made her seem most gracious while doing nothing. Find blankets, I told a server, and he sprinted for the first time all night. Someone sprinted. He came back with two, and we wrapped them around my father's shoulders, around my mother's lap. Stay with me, I said to my father, and he tried to smile, the stubborn half-grin he uses to say I'm still here. It faltered, but it was there. The siren began somewhere far off, a thin thread that might have been my imagination, then grew louder, real, inevitable, coming down our street toward a house that had been mine an hour ago. After the ambulance doors closed and the last guest slunk out under the weight of their own silence, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house breathe like it had a fever. The orchids sagged. The hired glasses sweated into neat rings. Somewhere a timer beeped for a course no one was eating. I washed the blood from my scraped palm and told myself I would not be surprised anymore. And that promise lasted until morning. I started with the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of hotel lobby scent leaking into the hallway, powder and something sweet, the perfume Carol wore that clung to upholstery. Inside, the bedspread was turned down like a nightly service. On the dresser, a travel case unzipped into a tiny vanity. Lipsticks clicked open to reveal shades with names like Society and Hostess. A jar of night cream sat with the lid half on, as if in mid-routine. A hairbrush lay bristles up, a few pale strands trapped in a static halo. In the closet, next to the spare linens, hung 3 silk blouses and a camel cardigan, still bearing a dry-cleaning tag from a shop near Carol's house. In the bathroom drawer, I found a toothbrush, a glass with water rings, and a contact lens case labeled CL. There was nothing accidental about it. My parents' room, the room I had chosen for them, smelled like unfamiliar soap and someone else's morning. In our laundry room, a small card had been magneted to the washer. Welcome, Carol, in bubbly handwriting. Under it, a note. Use delicate cycle. Marissa's machine is gentle. There was a basket of folded towels in a shade I had not bought. The towels had Lawson monograms. I didn't know whether to laugh or start throwing them into the yard. Eric's office door stuck for a second before opening, like the house was trying to stop me. On his desk were 3 neat stacks of papers held by bulldog clips. The first stack, estimates from 2 contractors, both titled Conversion of First Floor Bedroom to Study. They had measurements of the guest room sketched in pencil, with notes about built-in shelves, a coffered ceiling, and moving an outlet. The line items sang their own bleak lullaby: custom millwork, premium paint, sound attenuation for privacy. Each estimate had a sticky note in Carol's hand. Option A is more refined. Henry prefers the deep greens, and Henry's signature scrawled on a second page authorizing initial planning. The second stack, emails printed out, because Carol likes paper, from a furniture showroom about lead times for a leather wingback and a partner's desk. The third stack was the one that made my mouth go dry. A USPS change of address confirmation form, half filled with our address and the names Henry and Carol Lawson, the section for temporary or permanent, circled and starred. I checked the dates. The estimates were dated 2 weeks before the party. The change of address form had been completed online the morning after we closed on the house. This printout was a follow-up, waiting for a signature. A yellow folder tucked under the monitor contained a brochure from a home security company with a quote for additional fobs and lock cylinder replacement. I pulled my phone and opened our bank app. My hand shook so hard I had to steady it against the desk. The withdrawal leapt up at me like a gotcha in a magic trick I had never agreed to perform: $35,000. 1 week before the banquet. The memo field read, Deposit C. My throat tightened. I scrolled to the corresponding charge. There it was, a payment to a boutique catering firm, billed in Henry Lawson's name, with an email receipt forwarded to Eric. The sum matched the hors d'oeuvres that still smelled like garlic in our house. The bank categorized it as home/other. I sat down in Eric's chair and stared at the number until it blurred, then became sharp again. I walked through the rooms with a trash bag, not to clean God, there was so much to clean, but to see what the night had shed. In the kitchen trash, I found a copy of the run of show, our party planned like a corporate event, with Carol's initials next to each cue. In the recycling, a stack of branded tasting menus, all printed the day before, all stamped with the Lawson home. In the pantry, my low-sodium spices shoved to the back, replaced by jars with gold labels. In the entryway closet, a garment bag with Henry's suit, a lint roller, and a small zip pouch labeled spares. Eric came downstairs mid-morning looking like sleep had failed him. I did not ask him why the locks had been changed. I held the printed receipt out to him, and he stared at it, then at the floor. I wanted it to be nice, he said, but even he heard how small that sounded. She said he stopped. I pointed to the change of address form. He swallowed. It was just exploratory, he tried. My silence made it honest. It was preparation. When he left the room, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost declined, but the voice that came through was tight and familiar. Marissa? It's Leah, Eric's sister. We had always liked each other in the careful way women do when they recognize a shared map of family avoidance. She didn't waste time. I heard something happened last night. Are your parents okay? She took a breath. Listen. If I don't say this now, I'll chicken out. They did the same thing to me. The words landed like a match on dry grass. She told me about her little house in Plano, how her parents had temporarily moved in during a renovation and never left until her marriage was rubble. How Carol had installed her toiletries in Leah's bathroom just for convenience. How Henry had started receiving mail there, it just made sense for the HOA. How an office for Henry had replaced Leah's nursery. How David, her husband, went from bemused to resentful to gone. It took me a year to see it wasn't a phase, she said. It was a tactic. I sat on the bottom stair with the phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt. Why didn't you warn me? I asked. There was no accusation in it, just the raw question of a woman realizing she has been reading the wrong language. She made a broken sound. Because I thought maybe with you, they'd behave. Because I wanted to believe they could learn. Because I was ashamed I let it happen. She exhaled. And because every time I tried to name it, Mom cried and Dad called it family logistics and Eric asked me to be patient. It's always be patient with sons who don't want to challenge their mothers. She told me there had been a party at her place, too, an investment brunch, where Carol had introduced Leah's condo as Henry's next base, and by the time she returned from a work trip, her photos were replaced and a locksmith had already updated the cylinders. She had found a change of address confirmation in a pile of catalogs she didn't order. It starts cute, she said, like a study and forwarding mail, and ends with them acting like they're doing you a favor by occupying your life. After we hung up, I walked to the guest room again and took inventory with a different mind. This was not enthusiasm. I could see the steps now. Flatter, insert, replace, announce. My parents had been locked out of a house that was already being rebranded in gold script. I thought about the way Eric had said, Mom just likes order, and felt something inside me turn from belief to bone. But order is what people like his mother call it when they arrange the world so only their comfort fits. I opened our shared email and searched for the caterer, the florist, the furniture showroom. Threads bloomed. Carol was CC'd on everything. In some, she was the primary and I was the ghost. I found the original inquiry to the caterer sent from Eric's work account with Henry as the client name. I found an email to the security company asking for additional remotes for residents. I found a forwarded chain about study install timeline that assumed a start date next month. Each piece clicked into place like a malignant puzzle. The show had been scripted, and I had been cast as the grateful extra. By afternoon, the house looked like itself only if you squinted. I lined up the estimates, the change of address printout, the bank receipt, the HA note about a package with Henry's name. I put Carol's cosmetics back in their little case and zipped it shut, not out of kindness, but to hear the finality of the teeth catching. I took a photo of everything and emailed the photos to myself, to a folder. But Eric didn't invent this. He inherited it. But inheritance can be refused. I looked at our marriage and felt the warmth drain from the edges. If love had been here, it had been suffocated under phrases like, be patient, and Mom just likes order, under the weight of other people's names on my bills. I had thought the worst part of last night was watching my father struggle to breathe under the gaze of people who cared more about the plating than the person. I was wrong. The worst part was waking up and realizing it wasn't a nightmare but a plan. A premeditated scheme, practiced and perfected, rolled out with the confidence of people who have gotten away with it before. There had never been any real love between Eric and me, only my hope and his habit. And habits, I was learning, can be more ruthless than intention. I woke up the next morning with the house still smelling like truffle oil. I took a picture of my hand, cross-hatched with the scrape from the basement window, and another of the message thread where Carol wrote, "It will look more ours this way." Then I drove to the police station with a folder on the passenger seat and the ER discharge papers for my father tucked on top like a flag. Filing the report felt clinical, almost boring in the way that paperwork can be boring even when it's about your life. The officer listened, typed, and asked measured questions. Did I reside at the address? Could I prove ownership? Were the locks changed without consent? Were elderly persons denied shelter resulting in injury or medical distress? Yes, 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 and yes. He copied my deed and the hospital documents, took the screenshots I offered, and gave me a case number. We'll document unlawful lock change and possible elder endangerment, he said. Follow up with your attorney for civil remedies and protective orders. The words landed with the clean weight of tools laid out on a bench. I found my attorney the way I've always found what I needed. I asked a woman who had survived something. Our neighbor across the street, Denise, had divorced a man who liked to rehome her furniture during mood swings. She gave me the name of a lawyer who, in her words, doesn't wear pearls unless she plans to strangle the other side with them. Her name was Helen Park. Her receptionist slid me into a same-day slot as soon as I mentioned the phrase, elderly father, hospital. I brought my mother, because I needed her calm, and Eric, because I needed him to hear me say out loud what I would and would not allow. Helen's conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She wore a navy suit and the kind of flat shoes that mean business. I laid out my papers in tidy rows like a place setting. Here's what happened, I said, walking her through it. The party I didn't plan, the locks that didn't turn, the man at the service door who told me guests only, Carol at the glass advising me to come back later when it's more convenient, the basement window. My father's lips turning pale, the call to 911, the ambulance. I slid forward the photos. And here's what I found after. Helen's pen stopped when she reached the change of address form. They attempted to redirect mail to your residence in their names, she asked, tone utterly neutral in a way that felt oddly warm. Yes. She flipped to the contractor estimates. And this is before the event? Yes, I said again. Eric stared at the pages as if they were foreign currency he couldn't spend. Okay, Helen said, and then she started stacking the papers in a new order. We're going to do 3 things at once. 1. We're going to send a demand letter requiring the immediate return of all funds withdrawn from the marital account without your informed consent and reimbursement of every party expense, including rentals, catering, and the locksmith. 2. We're going to petition the court for a temporary restraining order and a protective order prohibiting Carol and Henry Lawson from entering or occupying the property, directing them not to interfere with mail, utilities, locks, or deliveries, and authorizing law enforcement to remove them if necessary. 3. We're going to formalize title. She looked at me. Is the deed in your name only? Yes. My voice steadied. I purchased the home with my separate savings, and the deed reflects that. I can provide bank statements and the closing packet. Then we will file a declaratory judgment to establish the home as your separate property and, if needed, obtain a quitclaim from your spouse to eliminate clouds on title. She turned to Eric. You may sign that voluntarily today. It does not remove your marital rights broadly, but it will make it very clear to your parents, neighbors, and any court that this is not their nest. It is Ms. Hale's home. Eric looked like a man who had stumbled out of a bright theater into noon sun. He began, then glanced at the ER form on the stack. The paper with my father's blood pressure numbers seemed to tilt the table. Before we invite your in-laws to a meeting, Helen continued, calm but implacable, there's a phrase you need to be prepared to hear. She set down her pen and folded her hands. Threat to the life of an elderly person. The room changed shape around those words. I pictured Carol's face when they were said in her presence. Even Eric flinched. My mother's fingers found mine under the table and squeezed, a steady, church basement squeeze that meant keep going. Helen emailed the demand letter that afternoon. It was a list written in a clear voice that did not raise itself to be heard. Return $35,000 withdrawn from the joint account. Reimburse all catering and rental charges paid in Henry Lawson's name. Pay all ambulance, ER, and subsequent medical bills related to the incident. Cease and desist from entering or attempting to enter the property without express written consent of the owner. Refrain from changing locks, forwarding mail, scheduling services, or representing the property as your own. Produce written acknowledgments that the residence is the separate property of Marissa Hale. We attached the case number from the police report and the hospital documents. Helen added one sentence that felt like a nail-driven true. Your actions created a threat to the life of an elderly person, as documented by medical professionals. She blind copied me. She sent it to Carol's personal email, Henry's business email, and at my request, Eric's. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with a text from Carol. Darling, this is so unnecessary. Lawyers only make things uglier. Let's talk like family. I stared at the word family and felt something cold move through me. I didn't reply her. 2 days later, we met in Helen's office. Carol arrived in a white blazer, pearl studs immaculate, Henry in a golf sweater that tried to disguise as contrition. Eric sat next to me, one chair away and a lifetime apart. Helen opened with the facts. She slid copies of the photos across the table, one after another, a quiet dealing of cards you can't unsee. Carol tried to put her hand on the pile as if to neaten it. But Helen didn't let her. We are here to resolve a very simple situation, Helen said. Ms. Hale owns the home at. You changed the locks, blocked entry, and prevented elderly guests from entering in inclement conditions, resulting in medical distress and hospitalization. You spent marital funds without authorization to host an event in which you represented her home as your son's property. You initiated mail forwarding to this address in your names. You solicited contractor estimates to convert that bedroom to a study for Mr. Lawson. These are not misunderstandings. These are actions. Carol's smile brightened the way an emergency flare does before it dies. We only wanted to help. Eric told us. Helen did not look away. Please understand me. Threat to the life of an elderly person. That is not help. That is not order. That is a phrase law enforcement and judges use when the outcome of carelessness is almost tragedy. Carol's color drained so fast I could see it happen. Her hand went to her throat, finding the pearls like a talisman. Henry cleared his throat and attempted reason. We'll cover the hospital copay. Of course. It was cold. But this tone. The demand is not a tone, Helen said. It is relief. We expect full reimbursement of the $35,000 withdrawal and all event costs, written acknowledgments, an agreement filed with the court that you will not enter the premises without Ms. Hale's consent, and a stipulation that any future contact with vendors or service providers regarding this address will be treated as interference. She turned to Eric. And we require a quitclaim deed today, or we proceed to seek temporary orders with exclusive possession and a protective order enforceable by arrest. Eric looked at me. For once, he didn't look to his mother first. Helen slid the ER report toward him. The numbers sat there like a metronome of consequences. He picked up the pen. "I'll sign," he said, the words small but audible. He signed the quitclaim, initialed each page of the agreement, and then let the pen fall with a soft click that sounded like something breaking kindly instead of loudly. Carol tried one last pivot, the old choreography. "Marissa, you're overreacting. Everyone knows Eric is the head of the household." People assumed. People assumed because you told them, I said, and my voice didn't shake. "You introduced my house as Eric's new nest, while my father sat outside turning blue." The checks arrived by courier the next morning, drawn from a Lawson business account with a memo line that said event reimbursement. The protective order was signed by a judge that afternoon. Helen filed the declaratory action on the property, and the clerk stamped separate property on the copy we kept. When the USPS letter about forwarding arrived too late, mailed by a machine that didn't know better, Helen faxed the order to the postmaster with a note that said, "Deliver to addressee only." The social part of the punishment happened without me. Business circles talk. Henry's golf friend had a wife with a sister who attended our party and told the story at a charity lunch with the exactness of a ledger. By Friday, the realtor pages buzzed. Family scandal involving the elderly. The HOA president sent me an email with 3 lines. "Glad your father is recovering. Heard. We stand with you." And then, almost tenderly, a PS. "Orchids look thirsty." Carol's invitations went unanswered. Henry arrived at his office to find a joke card on his chair, forwarding address, scrawled in someone's unkind hand. I did not gloat. I watered my plants. I booked my father's follow-ups and mailed the receipts to Helen, who sent them to the Lawsons with a note, per agreement. When a delivery truck tried to leave a leather wingback on my porch, I held up the protective order and watched 2 men carry the chair back down the steps like pallbearers at the funeral of a plan. I placed my parents' photographs back on the mantel and rehung the little watercolor in the hall where the study concept had been. Eric slept on the couch for a week, then in a friend's spare room. He texted apologies shaped like clouds, soft, shifting, and substantial. I kept my replies factual. The doorbell stayed quiet. The lock stayed mine. And when the house sighed at night, it sounded again like a place that knew who it belonged to. My father recovered slowly. The first week after the ambulance, I drove him to checkups with a thermos of weak tea and a blanket over his knees. He tried to tell jokes about hospital gowns and parking meters, but he tired easily. By the 3rd week, he could walk around the block again, a little stubborn cadence returning to his step. When the cardiologist finally said, "You're doing well, keep the salt low and the walk steady," Dad squeezed my hand in the elevator like he used to in crosswalks when I was 5. Sunday dinners returned like a ritual that had been briefly mislaid and then found in the right drawer. I planned them with the care of someone rebuilding a small chapel, roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, rice, green beans, fruit for dessert. Mom brought her cinnamon bread wrapped in a towel, and I set her chair where the floor is level and the light is kind. We ate with the sliding door cracked for air and spoke in the old, ordinary way, about the neighbor's new puppy, about my father finally beating the crossword, about a show my mother liked because the families on it still sat down to meals. Nobody mentioned orchids or lock cylinders. There was a gratitude in the quiet that we didn't try to name. Restoring the house became its own kind of therapy. I started at the threshold, where the script sign had once called it the Lawson home, and scrubbed the last loop of adhesive from the paint. I rehung the watercolor in the hallway and set our family photos back on the mantel. My parents at Niagara Falls in plastic ponchos, my father in his reflective vest at the depot, my mother blowing out candles with her eyes half shut. I rolled up the bruise-colored settee and sent it back to the warehouse with a polite note quoting the protective order. The velvet left a shadow on the rug that vacuuming erased, like a bad dream. I folded the heated throw at the end of the guest bed and placed Dad's crossword dictionary on the nightstand next to a lamp that is bright but warm. I found the low-sodium spices where they had been pushed aside and lined them up again, the little labels facing outward like sentries. Eric and I dismantled our own house more slowly. For a while he tried to be everywhere at once, apologizing, repairing, volunteering to carry groceries, and fix the broken hinge on the laundry door. He did what he should have done before, but the timing turned every kindness into a ghost of an earlier absence. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table where so many plans had been made, he finally said, "They manipulate me. I see it now." He looked older saying it, like admitting the truth cost him something he could never charge back. "I believe you," I said, because I did. He had grown up inside a weather pattern and called it climate. Yet belief did not knit the past back together. We tried a week of counseling, then another. He signed what needed signing. He reimbursed what needed reimbursing. He stayed at a friend's apartment to give me space. In the end, we didn't fight, we sorted. Dishes, books, the accidental artifacts people build together, 2 mugs from a beach town, a blanket we both pretended not to hate, the playlist we made on a road trip. We divided these gently. We cried once, in the garage, over a box of Christmas lights that had never found time to glow in this place. Then we carried the box to his trunk, and he drove away like a person obeying a necessary sign. At some point, the neighborhood rumor mill turned its attention to other porches, and I stopped glancing at the blinds when a car slowed. Leah came over for coffee with her baby, and we sat on the floor with blocks while she apologized for calling late the night the sirens came. I told her she had done exactly the right thing. We made a quiet promise to answer each other's calls on the first ring from now on. I wish I could say that forgiveness arrived with the same precision as a court stamp, that paperwork equals peace. But it doesn't. The protective order stayed on the fridge like a calmly worded prayer. My mother started leaving a Tupperware of soup in my freezer, just in case. My father took to inspecting the porch light before he left, screwing it a quarter turn tighter, telling me, "A house needs its eyes." Sometimes, late at night, I replay the evening my key didn't turn, and the outrage spikes like a fever breakout. Other nights, I remember a different detail, my mother cupping my father's hands and breathing warmth into them while the room full of strangers pretended not to watch. Eric asked if we could try again someday, the words stretched across a gap he couldn't measure. I told him the truth. Maybe, if someday comes with proof. If he does the work that can't be photographed. If he learns to say no to the people he once believed were his only yes. I left the door between us cracked like a window in spring, open enough for air, not wide enough for a move-in. He nodded. He said he understood. I hope he does. Love is not an eraser. It is a highlighter for what is already written. Because I will always defend my parents and myself. Not with cruelty, with clarity. On Sundays, when I set out plates and my mother asks where to put her bread and my father fusses with the lamp to get the crossword light just right, I think about how close we came to letting someone else write over us. Then I carry the chicken to the table, crack the window, and breathe freely. A family without respect is not a family. You can love people, you can try to forgive their flaws, but if they trample over your boundaries, then what you have is not love, it's control. And control, even from those closest to you, can destroy everything if you let it. The house I bought was not just bricks and mortar, it was my effort, my achievement, my symbol of security. Watching others try to seize it, erase my presence inside it, and treat my parents as if they were unworthy, it was like someone tried to erase me. But I refused. I fought back. And yes, it cost me my marriage, but it gave me back myself. Sometimes people ask me if I regret losing Eric. I don't have a simple answer. Maybe one day, if he truly changes, I'll consider giving him another chance. But that's not today. Because now my life belongs to me. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to defend your boundaries against those who were supposed to love you? Write about it in the comments below. I truly want to know. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. More stories are coming, stories that will forever change the way you look at family, loyalty, and love.